Utopian.
There you go. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'm very excited that our dear friend, mentor, mediator, pioneer in the field has agreed to sit with us today and spend a couple of minutes talking about his book, The Guide to Reflective Practice and Conflict Resolution. And um, I'll be sending out a link where you can purchase it if you haven't had a chance to already. I was fortunate enough to be able to review this few months ago, and as soon as I started reading it, I said we have to bring Michael in. Like this is fantastic, and it was insightful. We'll talk about the insights in just a moment. But what I loved was just that every word was so carefully crafted, right? It was just, and I mentioned this to Michael that I loved sitting and reading it because it was like poetry. He chose how every word was going to play together, and 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 you don't see that often anymore, right? People are rushing, like they'll try to just get something out there, but you can just tell that it has been very thoughtfully, very reflectively put together, and it shows. And so I started reading it, little bits of it before bed, and then you just kind of had this sense of things are going to be okay. So first off, I just want to say thank you for taking the time because it really did make it a joy to read.
Thanks, Cole. That's
Yeah,
very
well,
nice.
thank you. Thank you. Um, so, my first question is, can you just give us an overview of what is reflective practice?
Okay.
Just really
This is the
quickly
this
sum
is
up a
the
couple
elevator
quotes.
this is the elevator speech, right? Where
Right? Yeah.
you've got 1 minute. So the way I have pretty consistently described this is that it's an opportunity for us to learn from our experience, not just to have experience, not just to do trial and error, but to really understand why something. So the way we deal with it is there's an event, a moment, an incident, something occurred that's puzzling and surprising, and we as mediators take note of it. It's something that we hadn't expected. And so that becomes the basis for learning from the experience. And that is, why was I surprised? What was it about this surprise that called my attention? And through that process of self-exploration, we begin to discover an answer or an insight that then helps us both understand what occurred in that situation, but what we can do in the future. And you may, since you've read the book, Claire, you know that I tell this wonderful story about this little girl playing tic-tac-toe on the seatback console in an airplane. And she would play, and then she would ask her father, complain to her dad about the fact that I'm not winning. And instead of telling her what to do, the father asked her questions. He never offered her a piece of advice. She was about 8 or 9. And it would have been really easy for him to say, just do this, just do this. But instead, she was engaging in a process of trying something out, finding out what worked and why it worked, and exploring when something didn't work, what might be the cause and what to do about it. So it was a perfect example, to me, a perfect illustration of what we do in reflective practice. Too often, what happens is that people will have an experience that is unsettling in some way or another. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't. And by the way, when I talk about something unsettling, it can be really positive. My first experience that got me thinking about this, and then Robert Benjamin introduced me to the Reflective Practitioner by Donald Schoen. This was 1985. But my first curious experience was at an AFM conference, um, and I did a role play. I was the mediator, and the presenters and the people who were in the role play thought that I had done a brilliant job. and I hadn't a damn clue what I'd done. It was completely mysterious. And so people would say, yeah, Mike, great, go on, good for you. Lawyers don't know how to do that kind of stuff. And I'd go back to my little room at night and go, what the hell did I do? I had no idea,
Hmm.
and therefore no way of kind of replicating it. So for us in working with people, it's about the good experiences, not just about the frustrating ones. The whole point is to use them as opportunities
Yeah.
for learn.
Yeah. What I was thinking about with the story that you were just telling about the little girl was so often when someone tells us something, even if it is completely true, then there's a natural inclination in us to doubt, right? To question, like, is this really true? Do I trust where they're coming from? Am I going to completely own that? But when the light bulb goes off for ourselves, then we completely own it, right? It's a concept that we feel proud
Yeah.
of, that it, we take some ownership over, and we can fully integrate it into our psyche. And I was thinking about how much of our mediation training is really just somebody telling us this is the way things are, this is the way you do things, and this is the way we've always done things. And even though it would make for a very long mediation training, how much more powerful would it be if it could be much more much more question driven, right? Where you allow people to arrive at those conclusions themselves. So instead of just telling them we have to focus on self-determination, they're able to reach that light bulb moment themselves and reflect on what is self-determination and why is that so important in the practice. So I,
You see, that's what when I do a training, the role plays are those opportunities to use
mm,
reflective practice.
hmm
It's essential when you're teaching people, when you're providing them with information and you're teaching them skills, there has to be the didactic part of it. There is the presentation. This is what it's all about, whether it's through lecture or through reading. But then it's the integration of that knowledge and those skills that where reflective practice can really help.
mm,
And
mm,
that's what I do when I do role play coaching. I use the same ideas and methods that I use in reflective practice groups with trainees, whether it's in the beginning, the most beginning phases of training or more advanced, for the exact reason that you said, Claire. When when we have the information, we have the knowledge or the insight, and we own it, we get to use it in our own unique way.
right.
And, and that's
Mi-
very, very powerful.
Yeah.
Michael, quick question. I know you have reflective practice groups and trainings. Is a part of it, though, training the mediator, if you will, to self-reflect so that even when there aren't others around them for a conversation, they have a structure to really debrief, if you will, themselves and learn?
Very much so, Joe. When I first started doing this, there was nobody around that I could reflect with. So I was reflecting with myself. And I developed some guides to help me, questions that I would then ask myself to help, push me through that process. And they're included in the book. And so, yeah, it is learning how to reflect in the moment because there are experiences that we have, even though we have to respond so immediately to them, there are moments when we can sit back and say, well, that was really curious. That was unexpected. Now, what do I do? And understanding why something was curious or unexpected helps us then plan out the next step that we take. So, yeah, doing it in groups is a very powerful learning experience. Um, but this is something that we can do for ourselves, do one on, with a friend. Absolutely.
Would
I
you
have,
go ahead,
I was
Jim?
going to say, I have a new term for you, micro reflections, which
Reflection.
when
Okay.
you're actually in the session and trying to process,
Right. Right.
Claire, sorry.
So long as it's a micro reflection, right? If you take 5 minutes or so, the parties might wonder what's going on.
Well,
Um,
I do that in mediation.
you
I'll
you
take a
take
break.
that much time?
Yeah, well, it may not take 5 minutes. I'll say, anybody need a cup of coffee?
Mm,
Anybody need to just stretch their legs? I don't, it doesn't necessarily take an hour to sort these things out, but stepping away from the immediate moment and giving yourself some time is really valuable. And it can be just a minute
yeah.
or two or five, whatever it happens.
Would you mind sharing a couple of those tips when you're by yourself, you're not with a group, and you just need a couple of minutes to reflect?
The first and really the most important thing is to be aware, to be open to the surprising moment and be aware of them. Because so often with the fast pace of the work that we do, stuff just can slide right by if
Mhm.
we're not being attentive. So we've got to really be able to pay careful attention and be aware of when something sort of piques your interest, something that's different or unusual, or it can be tiny, not something. I've had situations where the only thing that was different is that the person um, started looking in a different direction, or their physical behavior was somehow different, or you could hear something in their tone of voice. Somebody who'd been talking like this all of a sudden
Mm.
becomes very slow and measured. And you go, the heck is that all about? So noticing is the first thing. And then asking yourself the simple question, why do I think this behavior is occurring? Or these words, these comments have occurred at all? And it's the second part of the question, why now? What has happened that might have prompted this? And also, what has prompted me to notice it? Why didn't it just slide by like the 50 other things that had passed in the previous 10 minutes? Why did I put, why did I focus on that? So asking myself those kinds of questions, why questions, are really helpful
Mm.
because that's what really leads to the learning. And this is what also distinguishes what we do from other kinds of consultation work. Um, all of this is valuable. So I always make it really clear that when I'm talking about this, as much as I eat, sleep, breathe, and believe in reflective practice, I'm also aware that there are other methods of learning that are valuable. So, for example, some people will run consultation groups in which a problem is, one of the people in the group says, I had this experience and I'm really puzzled about it. And everybody in the group says, here's what I would do if I were you. Here's my advice to you. Okay, that might be useful, but here's the problem. Each of us has a unique brain. We don't think the same way. We don't practice the same way. We don't perceive things the same way. And so while the advice may be helpful in some instances, it's always given with good intention and a good heart. We're not talking about somebody jumping in and trying to second guess or undermine somebody, but something that's offered really with good thought behind it. It's their idea. It's the way they practice, not the way I practice, not the way I see things, not what are my values, my style, my method. I've got a friend who is amazing at being able to use humor. And I've got a good sense of humor. Um, I don't always use it in the way that he does in mediation. And he might say to me, Michael, you should crack a joke here. You should do this or you should do that. Well, good on you because you know how to do it well and integrate it into your practice.
Right.
It doesn't come exactly that way. So here's great, a great piece of advice that's useless to me, not because the advice is bad, only because it's not applicable. So if I, look, this is, you use the term self-determination. And this is the same thing that I think about in terms of our work in reflective practice. If I tell somebody the answer to the question, it's my answer. If they discover the solution for themselves, it's self-determination. And as you said earlier, Claire, when you discover it for yourself, you own it. And then you can decide when to use the ideas and information, whether to discard it. You're in control. That makes a huge difference.
Thank you for that. Would you mind describing what a reflective group would look like? Like in my head, they're all wearing white robes and they have ferns and there's water flowing in the background. I'm assuming it doesn't always look exactly like that. Maybe
We
sometimes.
make, that's right. We make s'mores. We sing kumbaya.
I love it.
No. So, uh, one of the things I want to say about the groups is that because we don't have a particular philosophy about the right way to do mediation. We have people in the groups who would describe themselves as facilitative or narrative or transformative or directive or whatever. It makes no difference. The goal is how can we help them be the best at what they do? Not judging whether it's what I would do, but helping them. That's really important to mention. So the group gets together. We have some basic principles about using questions, not statements, obviously about confidentiality. And one person will identify a puzzling situation and something that they want to learn. And as the group leader, I start out with a series of questions asking them. We don't ask for a lot of detail about because if there's too much detail, everybody gets lost in the story. We love stories. It's the heart of our work. But in this instance, we only need enough information to be able to focus on the particular issue that the person's talking about. So they give a basic description. And sometimes we may ask them questions to add more detail. And then I begin to ask questions. I ask questions such as, when did you first notice this situation arise? And what was happening immediately before that? Or I have a colleague who's very much into sort of mind body, and she will ask, where did it sit in your body that you first noticed this? Was it something you heard, something you felt, something that was, okay, whatever. But the point is, when did you notice something? What did you notice? What was happening? And then ask them to think about what are the reasons that situation could have arisen. What are the possible explanations that you have for why this occurred? And somebody may come up with two or three. And then we look at whether those, from their point of view, whether those explanations really make sense, a hypothesis, if you will, about why something occurred. And out of that conversation, that exploration, they begin to identify one reason that makes the most sense to them as to why something occurred. It could be that they were pressed for time. It could be that they had a confusion about their own values. I'll give you an example that without breaking confidence, that occurred very recently, where a very competent, experienced senior mediator said, I've been thinking, since I know now about all of the common communication mistakes people make, I'm going to start out as part of my introduction and describe all of these and tell people don't do this, that if you do this, you're going to get into trouble. He said, but I have a real problem doing it. He said, I'm stumbling over the words, and and we explored why he was why he was struggling, and it was because he had a direct conflict between an idea that might be helpful and his values about self-determination and about parties discovering these things for themselves. And what he needed to explore was, how can I help people identify when they are in a communication loop that's not going to be helpful for them without telling them in advance? And he identified ways in which he can integrate that within his practice without compromising his fundamental values about what mediation is, his role as a mediator, and the role of the parties. So that's an example of how those questions can lead somebody to self-discovery. I had, because I know the person from a number of sessions, I had that in my mind as a possible, that's where the problem was for him. But if I had told him rather than his discovering it, it wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah.
So we take a little time, and then what also happens, to come back to your question, Claire, and not get too far afield, is that as groups begin to mature, and that is as people become comfortable with the process of asking questions, and really asking questions that don't say things like, why didn't you consider doing X? Isn't that a question? Well,
Yeah.
yes, that's a question, but that's not the kind we're looking for.
Right.
As they become more comfortable with the process, then they become integrated into the questioning as well.
Mm.
And I, as the leader, um, start out, and then gradually anyone in the group who wants to and has something to contribute will participate. The more
Michael,
mature groups, um, we trade off being the group leaders.
Michael, this has been really helpful for me in terms of trying to parse, mentorship, consultation or consultation groups, and reflective practice, and that model. But for the moment, I'd like you to generalize things and ask you, as you think about mediator qualifications moving forward, we don't really currently have anything like a mentorship requirement or consultation group requirement or reflective practice group requirement. And I'm wondering, do you think such things should in fact be developed? And I hate to use the word required, but that's why people do things when it comes to qualifications.
Oh,
Any thoughts about that?
I do, because I absolutely do. Because otherwise we become stale. And
Mm.
we have all, I think, those of us, I don't know all of you, I know many, but we've all seen colleagues who practice today the same way they did 20 years ago. Their practice doesn't look any different. They've learned nothing. And as a result, while they may be competent, they're not nearly as effective as they could possibly be. And they may be making mistakes. They may, for example, too easily think, well, this is an impasse. And it's because they don't have the requisite skills to be able to help the parties think through the impasse. I think it's critical, and whether it's done one-on-one, in small groups, large groups, um, it's really important. And and there are a variety of ways to do that. You can set up mentoring. You can set up reflective practice groups. In Ireland, where I do a lot of work, they have sharing and learning groups, which are being renamed. I'm so proud of this. Being renamed reflective practice groups.
Love it.
They have, in this country of 5 million people, and you think about the number of mediators, therefore, they have 31 active sharing and learning groups.
I
And they
love
want to expand that and make it a requirement that membership in the Mediators Institute of Ireland, that in order to continue your membership, you have to be part of one of these groups.
it. I love it. Okay. I know we're
One,
running out of time. Sorry, Jim. I keep cutting
just
out.
one final thing for me.
Oh,
how do we deal with the future and new developments, AI as an example, and the very many ethical issues that are involved in that? Do we have to wait for somebody to raise a vignette, that surprised them, or that, they were, how, can we somehow integrate? I don't know if it's reflective practice or consultation groups or mentorships, but how can we be looking forward as to how best integrate future technologies?
And I don't know enough about it to say how. To say whether, the answer is 100% yes. Has to be. As because what our work is based on what's happening in our society broadly. And AI is part of our society and only growing. So our challenge is to figure out how we do this. I mean, Jim, I had somebody walked into that came in one of our reflective practice groups who was the problem that she presented was that one of the clients in a divorce mediation walked in with 13 pages of printout from ChatGPT saying, I've researched the whole parenting thing, and what do we do? And she didn't know how to respond to that. So having those kinds of problems come up in our groups will help people learn how to integrate AI within their practice and to
Yeah.
support their clients who want to use it as part of their decision making.
Final little question. Would you ever introduce hypotheticals into a reflective practice discussion, or is it all based upon things that actually happen?
Oh, no, I use hypotheticals all the time. Yeah, as a way of testing and having somebody check out whether, particularly when you get to the stage of applicability. So somebody's come up with an insight, they think, and I'm talking to them. So how do you think this is going to work? Do you think it would work in this situation? Would it work in this situation? Why wouldn't it work in that? What's the limitation? Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Would you ever consider doing an audiobook?
Apart from the book that I wrote, yes,
Yeah, just reading out and turning it into an audible,
I would love to
maybe?
do that. I would
That would
love,
be great.
well, I would love to do that. I read to the people in my family all the time. I love it. I think it's a great way to engage. That is, when Claire, when I wrote the preceding book to this one,
Yeah.
um, I was so frustrated that I couldn't integrate the voices of
Mm,
others. And that's why I created that series of In Their Voices. We
right.
did, Chuck was one of the people I talked
Mhm.
with. And it was in order to have the audible,
Yeah.
to include additional ideas and information, which you can't do once the book is in print. How do
Right.
you do that? How do you integrate it? And the complexity of doing that. If I were to do an audiobook, it would have to be with other people's voices included.
I
It
love
would,
it.
whether it's conversation or just turning it over to them. I mean, in this current book, I invited 4 people to contribute separate essays for that reason. I invited people from reflective practice groups to put I to describe their experience within it, not to do a promo for reflective practice, but to say what it meant to them. Why? Because those voices are really important. And to have them in audio format would be even more extraordinary.
Yeah, I agree. That would be fantastic. I hope maybe that would just being able to listen to that and hear some of those voices and ideas, like going out on a long run in the hills and being able to reflect on all of it, that would be a dream. So we strongly encourage it. Yeah.
I've been told that in the past, Claire, I've been told that I have a great mediator's voice because it's soft and soothing. And my response was, that's my practice, is that I lull people to sleep. I write the agreement, they wake up and sign it. My
Whatever works.
concern is I'd have to work on inflection to make sure that people who are listening to the audiobook doesn't just fall asleep after 2 pages.
No, it'll be peaceful and perfect. Thanks, Michael.
Right?
All right, I know that you have something else to go to, so I'm trying to honor your time. You have a lot of people who are excited to hear from you today, so I can I can let you go on to your
Well,
next
this is
thing. But thank you so much for taking the time. And if
thanks, Claire.
for those
Thanks,
of you that
Joan.
haven't, again, I strongly recommend buying the book. Don't rush through it. Just keep it by your bedside table and just enjoy little bits. Like it's a little bit of dessert every night before bed. I'll be sending all of you a link to this, to a couple of articles that we've written reviewing it, and then places to purchase.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for this opportunity. This has been great.
Yeah,
Thank you, Michael.
yeah, it's good to see you.